Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to say a word, and I'd like you to think, really think about what it means to you. Injustice. What does this word mean to you? Can you think of an example? Is it important? Why is it important? We all have our own definitions of what words mean to ourselves. As a toddler, you might think an injustice is going to bed when you want to play with toys. To a teenager, it might be not going outside with friends on a school night. But as an adult, our opinions, specifically for right now on injustices, develop and change as we grow to meet the realistics of society's important matters. Our beliefs, passions, values, and perceptions on the world change and develop as we grow. Injustice. Remember this word? Think back to when you were a kid. Is it different from when you thought then? Are you more passionate about it? Does it truly mean something to you? I asked you to think about what it means and to define it. Injustice, as I define it, is wrongful discrimination, unfair penalty and treatment, inequality, and an issue that is wrongfully present. Injustice. When I asked you to come up with an example, did death penalty come up? If it didn't, maybe it will after we discuss it. The death penalty, also known as capital punishment, is when the law or those who enforce the law choose to punish someone by taking their life away from them. What designates or grants the power for someone to do this? What justifies killing an individual? Who makes this rule applicable to the situation? As the American Civil Liberties Union's website says, in 1973, 156 citizens were found to be taken off death row because they were wrongfully accused. Many cases there are suspected or convicted murderers, but they weren't actually guilty. Cases where murder is not planned or could be accidental. Think about a car crash. No one meant to harm the individual, so how can you justify harming them as punishment? As I was doing research, I came across an interesting line in the text of the Death Penalty Information Center. Prisoners have also raised claims that the aggravating circumstance that make a crime eligible for the death penalty are too broad, with some state death penalty laws encompassing nearly all murders rather than reserving the death penalty for a small subset. If there are no definitive laws in the justice system, then nothing is consistent or conscious of equality. You could have multiple situations, almost identical, and not all of them will be punished in the same fair way. ACLU is the biggest opposer to the death penalty. One of their main arguments is how the justice system chooses this punishment. They say that it is unjust, as the death penalty system in the US is applied in an unfair and unjust manner against people, largely dependent on how much money they have, the skill of their attorneys, the race of themselves and the victim, and where this took place. The biggest issue of injustice is there's no consistency, there's no equality. The definition itself says lack of fairness and justice. If you were to look deeper into the case studies on the death penalty, you would find that most of them are not handed out in a manner of just. My next point I would like to mention is in the Constitution. Our founding fathers of our nation gathered years ago to protect our rights and our freedoms so that we could live life as we make it. Notice how I said live. This nation was built on protecting our citizens, not harming them. Take a look at the 8th Amendment and the Bill of Rights. You can find this in the Constitution or on the White House's website, and it states that there is no cruel and unusual punishment. If the Constitution itself states that there's no cruel punishment, why are we allowing the death penalty? Those who are convicted of murder are being punished for committing a cruel act. I said cruel because murder is considered cruel. If murder is cruel, how can we allow the justice system to also serve the death penalty when that is murder, a cruel act? It just has a different name. What's worse is sentencing death, setting a date, is literally planning a premeditated murder. The only difference between them and the judges is that the victims don't know they're on death row, and judges are immune from punishment. Recently, more research has been done regarding the penalty and whether it's cruel or not. Studies show that blood levels after the death of the inmates have 90% of them feeling pain during the death, and almost 40% of them are conscious at the time of death. One reason for this could be that doctors and nurses are not allowed to perform these operations as it goes against the guidelines of the healthcare. But the other reason could be that those administering the drugs have little to no training. So think about it this way. If you went to the dentist and you had to get your teeth pulled, but they had no experience, it'd probably hurt tremendously, and you might even call it torture. So imagine dying when you're supposed to be unconscious, but you're alive and you feel the whole thing. How is that any different? If that is not cruel and unusual, then there is no use in having the Eighth Amendment because it protects no one. The last point I have tonight on injustice of the death penalty is justifying it. As I mentioned before, can you really justify something like this? Some say an eye for an eye, or the golden rule, treat others how you like to be treated. But can you apply this to such a heavy situation? Most of the time this is used is when you're kids and a sibling bites you or hits you and you're just returning the gracious gift. But if you think about it realistically, if you trip someone at work, should they trip you back? If you accidentally drop something on your foot, are you going to stick your foot out for them to put something back? Should you let them? If you think back to that car crash, maybe that person ran the red light, but they didn't survive. Should you also not make it? Or did they deserve it? Or maybe they did survive, you ran the red light, and they lost a leg. Are you inclined to give up your leg too? In an eye for an eye situation, this would be true. And how completely complicated would our life be that way? We can't pick and choose the different systems for when something is just or not. It becomes itself an injustice. Justice systems require consistency. If there is an eye for an eye that works on murder, then it should work on everything else too. So the next time you steal lunch or you bump into someone on purpose, think about that. One last note before I wrap it up tonight is imagine if there was a serial killer and instead of the death penalty, they got sent to maximum security for life. But you had a member in your family who had done an unpremeditated murder and they got death sentenced. How would you feel then? Would you fight against it? What words would you use? Would it be unfair, an inequality? Would it be discrimination or an injustice? The world is always changing and developing its beliefs. Since 1976, 1,491 inmates have been executed in the US. And despite the fact that it declined in 2009, it's become used more recently since 2016. My hope is that you all see this injustice at play with the death penalty, and that you see the broad specifics on who gets it, why they get it, on whether it violates the rights, and who can truly back this up as something they want all of the time. There should be consistency, equality, and fairness, or it is considered to be an injustice, also known as the death penalty. Thank you. Did you like it?